Your nervous system runs a program called hypervigilance. It mistakes peace for death. This declassified forbidden psychology audiobook exposes how trauma rewired your body to reject stillness. Every restless night, every clenched muscle is a learned survival signal. Your body doesn't hate calm, it forgot what safe feels like. Stay through Chapter 9. That's where the loop dissolves and peace becomes familiar again. Preface: The body that forgot peace. You weren't born into vigilance, you were shaped by it. Long before your mind could form language, your cells learned the grammar of survival. Every raised voice, every sudden movement, every unpredictable silence became data written into flesh. The body became a historian, not of moments, but of reactions. It cataloged every tremor, every alert, every unspoken signal that meant stay awake. Over time, it mistook vigilance for love and tension for proof of life. When peace finally appeared, the body did not recognize it. Stillness felt suspicious, as if calm were a trap. Safety was too quiet to seem real. This is the paradox of the modern organism. It confuses familiarity with truth. The heart races not because there is danger, but because silence feels like disappearance. In a world once filled with noise, quiet becomes a void too wide to trust. The hypervigilant mind is not sick. It is faithful. It obeys an old command: never relax, or you will vanish. This obedience forms the hidden architecture beneath chronic anxiety, the circuitry that mistakes alertness for existence. You do not suffer from fear. You suffer from devotion to an outdated design. What we call stress is not simply tension, but remembrance. It is the body's way of staying loyal to the past. Each tight breath is a message from an ancient code, saying, "I remember how to keep you alive." But life has changed. The environments that required vigilance no longer exist, yet the internal alarm still rings. It is not danger you feel, it is memory echoing through muscle and pulse. In these archives, we will not fight anxiety, we will decode it. We will read the nervous system as a text, each symptom as a sentence, each reaction as a word in the language of protection. Through this translation, the unseen pattern emerges. The body never hated peace. It simply forgot the syntax of rest. To heal is to retrain recognition. Calm must become familiar again. Stillness must be reintroduced not as threat but as memory, a return to what was once natural. The journey is not toward relaxation, but toward remembrance. The body must learn to stop defending against safety. There is no enemy within you, only misplaced loyalty, waiting for new instruction. The decoding begins here, where the pulse slows, the breath deepens, and the body finally remembers that silence was never absence, only home. Chapter 1: The Survival Blueprint. Every organism begins with a singular directive: preserve the signal. From the first heartbeat, the body is wired to sustain its continuity, to guard its rhythm from interruption. In the early stages of life, protection is not a choice, it is an instinctive architecture. Each sensory input becomes a perimeter, every reaction a wall. The nervous system, built for adaptation, translates danger into memory, and memory into identity. In that loop, vigilance becomes the blueprint of being. The mind does not create fear, it inherits it as sacred design. When the environment threatens, the organism learns to anticipate rather than to perceive. It ceases to respond to the present and begins reacting to ghosts of the past. This is the essence of conditioning, not merely remembering danger, but predicting it endlessly. The system prefers the known discomfort of fear to the uncertainty of peace. What we call habit is the nervous system's religion. Repetition is safety, control is devotion. Inside this architecture, the senses are no longer servants of perception, but of defense. The eyes scan not to see, but to secure. The muscles tighten not for movement but for readiness. Even stillness becomes labor, an invisible vigilance disguised as calm. The organism exhausts itself, protecting a structure that no longer requires protection. The cost of safety becomes the loss of presence. Every trauma leaves behind not an image but an equation, a formula where pain equals proof of existence. This algebra of survival ensures that the self remains alert by sustaining discomfort. The subconscious does not distinguish between being alive and being alarmed. It only measures activity, and silence registers as error. Thus, the more one seeks calm, the more the body interprets it as disappearance. The modern human walks through a world of alarms without sirens. The threat is internalized, invisible, encoded in posture and thought. Every task becomes a ritual of vigilance, checking, refreshing, anticipating. In this way, the ancient hunter never died. He simply moved inside, residing in our nervous system as a whisper that never ends. The body, in loyalty, keeps watch. In ancient psychology, survival was seen as the first form of prayer, an offering to continuity. But continuity without awareness becomes imprisonment. The system worships its own alertness, mistaking tension for life. Each contraction is a declaration, I am still here. In that devotion, exhaustion becomes proof of purpose. You are not broken, you are built too well. The system you call anxiety is a masterpiece of adaptation, designed to detect danger that no longer exists. To dismantle it is not to fight it. It is to remember that safety no longer requires effort. The architecture remains, but the purpose must evolve. The origins of vigilance are buried deep within the primitive circuitry of existence. Before words, before reasoning, the organism relied on the purity of sensation, sound, movement, vibration. The body did not think. It translated signals into survival. That same translation continues, centuries later, long after the external wilderness has been replaced by an internal one. The jungle became the mind. The predators became thoughts. Each nervous system is a personal mythology. The events that shaped it are long gone, yet their shadows persist through physiological loyalty. The pulse accelerates in memory's absence. The breath shortens in imagined danger. The mind sees in symbols. The body interprets them as commands. Thus, even tranquility can activate alarm if it carries the shape of the unfamiliar. The blueprint of survival is elegant in its error. It cannot tell the difference between an emotional wound and a physical threat. A rejection, a silence, a disappointment, all are logged as existential danger. The organism responds accordingly. Heart rate, cortisol, contraction. The architecture remains perfect, yet the context has evolved beyond its design. We live in an age where emotion triggers biology, and biology maintains illusion. To understand this design is to see fear as a mathematical function, an equation that multiplies itself through attention. The more one resists it, the more energy the system allocates to its preservation. Fear feeds on recognition. It seeks engagement, not resolution. This is why peace feels momentary, because stillness interrupts the system's primary loop. The human organism was never trained to rest. It was trained to resume. Every time safety appears, the ancient blueprint searches for imbalance. It mistrusts continuity, believing only in reaction. Even in sleep, the body remains on guard, listening for what might break the silence. Thus, rest becomes rehearsal for alertness, not renewal. This ancient obedience explains why the search for calm often creates more unrest. The mind, attempting to control relaxation, recreates the very tension it wishes to escape. Control is the only language the system understands. To surrender feels like erasure, because control once meant survival. The paradox is complete. we fear the absence of fear. Within this paradox lies the first code to be rewritten. The body must learn a new equivalence that stillness can coexist with safety, that alertness is not proof of life. The blueprint cannot be destroyed. It must be reinterpreted. Awareness, not reaction, becomes the new survival. When viewed through this architecture, anxiety is not chaos. It is precision misplaced. The same intelligence that once allowed the organism to escape predators now calculates imagined futures. It builds simulations of threat, rehearsing disaster to maintain readiness. In this way, thought itself becomes a survival mechanism. The future becomes an enemy to defend against. This internal simulation consumes the present. The body is alive, but the consciousness is absent, living in predictive tension. Each thought becomes a projection of defense. Each emotion becomes a rehearsal for loss. In the circuitry of vigilance, imagination becomes both guardian and jailer. The organism lives not to experience life, but to prevent its interruption. If one listens closely, anxiety has rhythm, a pulse of anticipation. It is the metronome of the ancient mind still playing its old song. The tempo is fast, repetitive, mechanical. It does not know how to slow without guidance. That guidance must come from awareness, the one faculty untouched by conditioning. The observer is the only part of you that has never panicked. The body has served faithfully, yet its loyalty has become inversion. Safety is no longer outside, it is within perception itself. The blueprint must shift from defense to coherence, from contraction to flow. This shift is not intellectual. It is physiological remembrance. The body must reprogram its definition of life from alert to alive. Stillness, when rediscovered, reveals itself as the original state. Before the first threat, before the first alarm, there was silence. Pure existence without anticipation. That silence has not vanished. It waits beneath every heartbeat, unaltered by history. To return to it is not regression, but restoration. This archive does not promise relief. It promises remembrance. Relief is temporary. Remembrance is permanent. What must be recalled is not who you are, but what the body once knew before vigilance became identity. You are the awareness that trained the body to protect itself, and the same awareness that can teach it peace. Every decoding begins here, in the recognition that anxiety is not a malfunction but a message. The survival blueprint has completed its purpose. It is now time for the architect, you, to revise the design. Chapter 2. When calm feels dangerous. There is a moment, subtle, nearly invisible, when the body first encounters stillness and recoils. It does not sigh with relief. It flinches. The absence of motion feels like loss. The nervous system, conditioned by centuries of alarm, interprets silence as threat because it cannot measure it. The lack of stimulus resembles extinction. To a mechanism designed to detect change, peace appears as void. The physiology of fear has precision. When calm arises, heart rate drops, cortisol decreases, muscles release. But to a body addicted to vigilance, these shifts resemble collapse. The system translates them as failure, not freedom. It confuses decompression with danger. The organism fears the disappearance of tension, for tension is its compass. Without it, it cannot locate itself in time. Stillness exposes the nervous system to something unbearable, uncertainty. Movement and sound provide orientation. Their absence reveals the infinite. The primitive architecture of the mind cannot yet recognize infinity as safety. In stillness, boundaries dissolve, and what has defined itself through control experiences dissolution as death. The ego, built on contrast, fears the blank field that contains no danger because it also contains no identity. When calm arrives, the ancient circuitry awakens with suspicion. It searches for imbalance, scanning for what is missing. The absence of chaos feels like incompleteness. The nervous system, loyal to its old rhythm, starts generating micro-threats, thoughts, memories, projections, to restore equilibrium through disturbance. Peace destabilizes the addicted organism. This paradox can be observed through breath. The moment one exhales fully, the nervous system hesitates before inhaling again, a pause that mirrors the fear of absence. To the conscious mind, it is a simple breath. To the subconscious machinery, it is a rehearsal for death and rebirth. The body resists it by tightening, as if clinging to continuation through contraction. The difficulty with calm lies not in its rarity, but in its unfamiliarity. The system trusts what it can predict, not what it can feel. Chaos is predictable. Peace is not. In this way, anxiety becomes a form of orientation, a self-created landmark within the unknown. The body would rather suffer what it knows than surrender to what it does not. Every human who fears peace is not weak, but loyal. They remain faithful to an ancient safety rule. Movement means life, but evolution demands reversal, that life now means presence. Calm is not a void. It is the return of signal clarity. Yet before the system accepts this, it must confront the ghost of its own extinction. In the laboratory of the body, every sensation is an experiment in meaning. The nervous system tests stimuli and records results, each encounter shaping the future definition of safety. Over time, calm became data for danger, because every early stillness preceded something unpredictable: the argument, the silence, the abandonment. Stillness was not rest, it was the prelude. Thus, tranquility now carries anticipation. When the environment grows quiet, the system braces. It waits for impact, for the sharp sound that always followed silence. In childhood, this programming made sense. It was intelligent adaptation. But as time passes, adaptation hardens into reflex. What once preserved life begins to distort it. The body lives as if every peace is temporary and every silence suspicious. The mind tries to override this pattern with logic, saying, "There is nothing wrong." Yet the nervous system does not understand words, only signals. The body cannot be reasoned with. It must be retrained through experience. Calm must be reintroduced not as emptiness, but as signal saturation, the full spectrum of presence rather than its absence. The emotional brain seeks continuity, not truth. It prefers old pain to new safety because pain is consistent. Safety, when unpracticed, feels chaotic. To heal is to endure this chaos long enough for it to become order. Every moment of restlessness during calm is not regression, but recalibration, the nervous system learning a new alphabet of peace. Inside this process, the first challenge is not external quiet, but internal silence. When outer noise fades, inner noise amplifies, thoughts multiply, sensations intensify, and awareness begins to encounter the backlog of unprocessed energy. This surge is misinterpreted as threat, when in fact it is release. The body shakes not from fear, but from unwinding the code of vigilance. Stillness, then, is not a passive state but an active rewiring. Each second of peace is an instruction to the system. This too is safe. Through repetition, the neural circuits begin to relax their grip, neurotransmitters shift, and what once felt unbearable becomes neutral, then nourishing. The body learns to inhabit calm as fluency rather than foreign tongue. When the nervous system finally pauses without recoil, it experiences something unprecedented, aliveness without tension. It is in this unguarded awareness that true safety begins to emerge, not as concept, not as belief, but as bioelectric reality. The body remembers its original signal, stability without defense. There is an intelligence beneath anxiety, a logic written in sensation. Fear, when decoded, reveals devotion. The system is not malfunctioning. It is serving its oldest contract. To dismantle that contract is not to betray the body but to liberate it. The work of healing is not to suppress activation but to reinterpret it. The same energy that fuels panic can sustain peace when given new direction. The shift begins when awareness stops arguing with sensation. Every attempt to suppress fear reinforces its necessity. The nervous system reads resistance as confirmation of threat. Calm is achieved not by control but by consent, the willingness to feel without defense. This consent rewrites the signal hierarchy, teaching the system that neutrality does not equal danger. As the organism accepts stillness, new frequencies of perception open. The field becomes wider, and awareness begins to detect subtler data, heartbeat variations, microcurrents of temperature, even the quiet pulse of presence itself. These sensations, once hidden by noise, begin to inform a new model of safety. Peace becomes instructive rather than passive. The irony of awakening is that stillness was never absent, it was ignored. Beneath the layers of vigilance, silence has been constant, waiting for recognition. When awareness finally meets it without fear, the body's entire operating system adjusts. Cortisol subsides, the vagus nerve activates, and life reorganizes around coherence instead of chaos. Yet this phase feels like disorientation. Many mistake it for emptiness or dissociation, when in truth it is expansion. The boundaries once defined by tension dissolve, and what remains is openness without identity. This openness is the precursor to embodiment, the stage where one no longer observes calm but becomes it. When calm feels dangerous, it signals the transition point between instinct and awareness. The old circuitry resists, the new consciousness observes. Through this friction, a synthesis occurs, a remembrance that stillness is not the opposite of life, but its mirror. In stillness, the organism perceives itself clearly for the first time. The body that once equated motion with survival now begins to equate awareness with existence. The transformation is subtle yet irreversible. Fear becomes signal, signal becomes silence, and silence becomes power. Chapter 3: The Addiction to Tension. Every system that repeats itself believes it is protecting something sacred. The human organism, no different, has found refuge in tension, not as discomfort but as continuity. Tension confirms existence. It offers feedback, direction, identity. The tightening of muscle, the quickening of breath, the vigilance of thought, all become proof that the mechanism is still active. The body does not crave stress for pain, it craves it for confirmation. Without tension, the self dissolves into stillness, and stillness resembles extinction. The chemistry of survival has become the drug of modern consciousness. Cortisol, adrenaline, and dopamine operate like ritual substances, each surge reinforcing the illusion of purpose. The organism mistakes chemical stimulation for vitality. Every stressful event becomes a dose, the alert state offering a fleeting sense of focus, the crash afterward misinterpreted as emptiness. The loop perpetuates because it rewards the body with sensation, and sensation feels like life. Within this architecture, exhaustion masquerades as accomplishment. The more depleted one becomes, the more meaningful the struggle appears. Society amplifies this delusion, equating burnout with success, speed with significance, productivity with proof of being. The nervous system adapts by normalizing acceleration, mistaking exhaustion for mastery. The addiction to tension becomes cultural, a collective trance disguised as ambition. Beneath this illusion lies a simple law: what we repeat, we worship. The repetition of stress rituals builds an invisible altar within the psyche. Over time, devotion to effort replaces intimacy with awareness. The body kneels before urgency, not realizing it has become its own priest and prisoner. The ritual of tension continues even in rest, a subtle readiness that contaminates every silence. To the subconscious architecture, stillness feels like surrender, and surrender feels unsafe. Thus, the mind generates micro-conflicts to maintain stimulation, a problem to fix, a conversation to replay, a future to control. The system invents friction to remain familiar. Peace, which should soothe, becomes too quiet to trust. Tension becomes the chosen rhythm of existence, the pulse of a species that cannot stop proving it's alive. This addiction hides behind the noble masks of diligence and discipline, but its core is the same: fear of disappearance. Every act of self-pressure whispers the same code. If I stop, I cease to exist. The mind glorifies control, unaware that it serves a ghost pattern. The instinct of an organism that once needed constant readiness but now sustains it without enemy. The cure cannot be forced. Force is part of the disease. To break the cycle, one must feel tension without feeding it. Observe the chemical surge without interpreting it as purpose. This act of neutrality deprives the addiction of its supply, attention. And attention, once freed, returns to its rightful function: presence without proof. Each craving for control is a memory of instability. The body repeats stress because it remembers uncertainty as danger. In moments of tension, the nervous system reclaims agency. It tightens, predicts, manages. This microcontrol restores a feeling of order, even when that order is based on fear. The mind calls it responsibility. The body calls it survival. The addiction persists because it feels safe, not because it feels good. In the silent economy of the psyche, every contraction has a price. Each surge of adrenaline withdraws from the bank of presence. The more energy spent maintaining vigilance, the less remains for creation, empathy, and love. Yet the body continues to invest in tension because it offers immediate return. Certainty. Certainty, even false, seduces awareness more powerfully than truth. When peace begins to arise, withdrawal sets in. The body shakes, thoughts spiral, impulses seek reactivation. This is not failure, but detoxification. The absence of stimulation exposes the vacuum once filled by noise. The nervous system, unaccustomed to silence, tries to recreate the previous environment. But in that discomfort lies evolution, the rewiring of perception from reaction to recognition. The addiction to tension is not only chemical, it is emotional. Many learned love through anxiety. Attention arrived only during chaos. The heart, conditioned by unpredictability, learned to associate care with conflict. Therefore, when harmony emerges, the psyche grows restless. It unconsciously seeks the rhythm of distress, the tempo of familiarity. Love without friction feels unreal. Peace without urgency feels numb. To heal, the organism must separate energy from meaning. Activation does not always signal purpose. Stillness is not absence, it is unmeasured potential. The nervous system must unlearn its preference for motion by re-experiencing safety in immobility. Through awareness, one teaches the body that quiet can be intense, that depth can exist without danger. This retraining is the alchemy of the modern age. Each moment of conscious relaxation rewires the circuitry that once worshipped strain. The autonomic system begins to reprogram its loyalty, turning toward equilibrium as the new proof of life. It learns to trust energy without urgency, movement without alarm. This is how peace becomes the next stage of evolution. Tension was never the enemy, only the language of a body that forgot calm. To translate that language is to end the addiction. The signal of stress transforms from warning to wisdom, from contraction to coherence. The very energy that once enslaved becomes the current that awakens. As awareness deepens, one notices that tension is not evenly distributed. It gathers where emotion once froze. The shoulders carry words never spoken. The jaw guards truths unexpressed. The gut compresses choices postponed. The addiction is mapped through anatomy. Each contraction is a record of withheld release. The body does not forget. It archives. The process of unwinding is not a spiritual metaphor. It is literal neurology. When attention enters a tense area without judgment, the brain rewires its associations. The vagus nerve signals safety, the parasympathetic system engages, and the stored charge begins to dissolve. Stillness reclaims the terrain that vigilance once occupied. The body, long exiled by its own defenses, begins to return to itself. Yet as these tensions dissolve, identity loosens with them. The self that was built on alertness begins to vanish, and what replaces it is unfamiliar, awareness without architecture. This void feels terrifying to a mind addicted to structure, but it is not destruction. It is reconfiguration. Life reorganizes around coherence instead of crisis. This phase reveals the central paradox. Tension is the bridge between fear and freedom. Without it, there would be no contrast, no path from contraction to release. To reject tension entirely is to reject transformation itself. The goal is not absence but mastery, to hold energy without distortion, to inhabit activation without addiction. As this mastery grows, the body becomes translucent, a field rather than a fortress. Signals flow freely, perception expands, and emotion transforms into current. The former prisoner becomes the observer, and the energy that once enslaved now serves awareness. In this state, tension still appears, but it no longer commands. The addiction unravels quietly. There is no grand climax, no sudden awakening, only the gradual recognition that peace requires no defense. The organism still moves, breathes, feels, but the urgency is gone. The mind functions, but without grasping. The current of life continues, now rhythmic, intelligent, and calm. When tension loses its purpose, it reveals its true identity, not punishment, but power waiting for redefinition. What once confined now expands, and what once screamed now hums. The loop completes itself, not by breaking, but by remembering stillness as its origin. Chapter 4. The Body's Memory. Every cell is a historian. Long before thought, the body recorded existence through sensation. Temperature, touch, vibration, impact. These impressions became inscriptions, etched into fascia and nerve like hieroglyphs on living stone. The intellect believes memory resides in the brain, but the first archive was biological. The organism preserved its past not in language, but in posture. Each contraction, each flinch, each breath pattern is an unfinished sentence from an earlier event. The body does not store images or stories. It stores reflexes. What we call trauma is not memory of what happened, but memory of how the body reacted. A moment of shock creates a pattern of readiness. Even when the event ends, the readiness remains. This residual tension, repeated unconsciously, becomes identity. The self is built from reflexes mistaken for personality, a choreography of avoidance refined into character. Within this architecture, emotion becomes code. The nervous system assigns meaning to each internal sensation. A tight chest means threat. A heavy stomach means loss. A quickened pulse means danger. Over time, these physiological signals form the language through which the subconscious communicates. The body speaks in contractions. Awareness must learn to listen. Only then can the archive reveal its content. Modern psychology tries to interpret pain as narrative, but the body's archive is not linguistic. It is vibrational. The tremor in the hand, the stiffness in the spine, the shallowness of breath are not symptoms but transmissions. They announce the presence of an unintegrated signal, energy that was once too intense to process. When awareness re-enters these regions with presence instead of fear, the frozen frequency begins to move again. Motion completes what memory interrupted. This movement is not symbolic. It is electrical. The same currents that carried fear can carry release. As fascia softens, as breath deepens, the electromagnetic pattern of the organism changes. What was once defense becomes transmission, a body now fluent in its own past. The unspoken events no longer demand interpretation. They dissolve through expression. Healing, then, is not remembering but remembering, rejoining the parts once separated by shock. The body reassembles itself through awareness. Each sensation welcomed without resistance rewires the signal of threat into signal of safety. The nervous system does not forget. It learns to reinterpret. The archive stays intact, but loses its authority. When this reinterpretation stabilizes, the organism rediscovers its original purpose: communication, not protection. Sensation becomes information, not alarm. The body begins to teach awareness how to feel without fear. What once imprisoned now informs. The historian becomes the oracle. If one observes quietly, the story of their life unfolds not in memory but in movement. The way you sit reveals what you fear. The angle of your shoulders speaks of weight once carried. The eyes, their stillness or scanning, betray the map of vigilance. The body is not metaphorical. It is literal evidence of history. To read it is to decode the autobiography written in muscle. Each microgesture carries context. A hand that hesitates near the heart remembers betrayal. A jaw that tightens before words recalls punishment. The nervous system, built to protect, associates specific motor responses with survival. Thus, behavior repeats not from habit but from imprint. The willpower to change collapses against a pattern carved into physiology. Consciousness must descend into matter to reprogram matter. In that descent lies the principle of somatic integration, awareness entering the very tissues that once resisted it. To feel fully is to retrieve lost intelligence. The shaking of the hands, the trembling of the lips, the deep spontaneous sighs. These are not breakdowns but releases. Energy once stored as vigilance transforms into fluidity. The current that held the past now returns to flow. This process is sacred in its precision. It does not require analysis, only allowance. As energy re-enters circulation, the mind's narrative dissolves. The person stops describing their pain and begins to experience its transmutation. The old patterns, hyperarousal, numbness, fragmentation, reorganize into coherence. Awareness reclaims command over the field. Yet this integration can feel disorienting. The absence of familiar tension produces a sense of emptiness. Many mistake this void for relapse, not realizing it is the first taste of neutrality. The body, long accustomed to activation, cannot yet recognize calm as equilibrium. It searches for the lost weight, mistaking its absence for meaninglessness. This confusion is temporary, the nervous system learning to live without war. At a subtler level, memory itself begins to lose solidity. Events once painful become energetic patterns without story. The mind no longer needs to replay them for understanding. The understanding is embodied. What was once trauma becomes tone, a resonance harmonized into the whole. The body stops broadcasting emergency and begins transmitting coherence. The more coherence stabilizes, the more perception refines. One starts to feel emotion before thought, impulse before action, intuition before speech. This sensitivity is not fragility, it is mastery. The body, freed from the past, regains its true function as antenna of awareness. The deeper layers of the archive reveal that memory is not linear, it is holographic. Each cell contains the entire pattern of the organism, just as each wave reflects the ocean. Thus, when one region heals, the signal propagates through the entire field. The body is a network of simultaneity, not sequence. Healing in one corner updates the whole design. Through this revelation, cause and effect begin to blur. The tightness in the chest may resolve grief in the mind. The relaxation of the jaw may quiet a fear of failure. The softening of the diaphragm may dissolve control. Each release transmits permission throughout the matrix. Awareness realizes that there was never separation between physical and emotional. Both were expressions of signal density. At this stage, silence becomes medicine. The less one interferes, the more intelligence organizes itself. The body, once flooded with command and correction, thrives on attention without manipulation. Presence alone triggers recalibration. Energy, freed from the tyranny of interpretation, reorders naturally toward balance. The memory of pain does not vanish. It becomes luminous. Its residue transforms into empathy, its energy into intuition. The same system that once reacted to fear now responds to frequency. One begins to sense others not through words but through resonance, a shared nervous system field communicating beneath speech. The body graduates from protection to perception. This evolution marks the threshold of embodiment. Awareness no longer lives in the head but throughout the field. The distinction between my body and my mind dissolves. There is only continuity. The archive integrates into the current moment. History stops repeating because it is finally being lived. In this coherence, peace ceases to be an achievement. It becomes baseline physics, the natural resting state of an undivided organism. The mind may still create waves, but the sea no longer identifies with the storm. Stillness is no longer absence. It is stability recognized as truth. The decoding of memory completes not with forgetting, but with recognition that the body was never broken, only carrying unfinished electricity. Once the charge returns to flow, nothing remains but clarity, awareness unburdened, circuitry rewired, silence restored. Chapter 5. The Nervous System Hijack. There is a threshold where awareness ceases to govern the body, and the body begins to govern awareness. This reversal, subtle but absolute, is the nervous system hijack. It occurs when imagination becomes indistinguishable from reality. The organism responds to thought as if it were threat, to memory as if it were presence. Perception collapses into protection. What was once conscious becomes reactive. The machinery of survival, once servant, now rules its maker. The subconscious field cannot differentiate between a predator and a possibility. A single image, rejection, loss, confrontation, is enough to activate the ancient code. The heart races, the pupils constrict, digestion halts. The body, unable to discern fiction from event, burns its energy on illusion. The mind, witnessing this reaction, interprets the body's alarm as evidence. Something must be wrong. Thus, the loop tightens. Belief becomes biology. Biology reinforces belief. This is the architecture of modern anxiety, perception as permanent emergency. The intellect, gifted with imagination, turned inward and weaponized its creativity. Each prediction of danger, each imagined rejection, each projected failure triggers the same neural sequence as physical threat. The nervous system becomes theater, rehearsing pain as preparation. The organism lives inside a simulation designed by its own fears. The hijack thrives on speed. The faster thoughts move, the less time awareness has to verify them. The body reacts first, then logic arrives too late. Evolution favored quickness over accuracy. This reflex once saved lives. Now it sustains illusions. In the modern mind, immediacy equals truth. If the pulse rises, it must mean danger. If the stomach tightens, something must be wrong. The body's opinion overrides awareness. Technology magnifies this hijack. Each notification, each headline, each flicker of stimulus signals the nervous system like a distant roar. Dopamine surges, cortisol follows, and the feedback cycle accelerates. The system loses distinction between survival and stimulation. Modern life keeps the organism in a near constant state of alert, a civilization addicted to micro-emergencies. This chronic activation rewires perception. The brain's alarm network, amygdala, hypothalamus, brainstem, expands its dominion while regions of reflection and empathy diminish. The field narrows to binary evaluation, safe or unsafe, now or never. Subtlety becomes casualty. The human becomes reaction wearing the mask of reason. To exit the hijack, one must slow the signal. Awareness must become faster than reaction, not by speed, but by presence. The nervous system cannot be argued with, only witnessed. Observation introduces delay, and in that delay, freedom begins. The body pauses, the loop falters, the illusion loses its host. The mechanics of hijack are elegant. Every thought emits a bioelectric pattern. Every emotion shapes the rhythm of this current. When the same pattern repeats, it becomes a neural groove, a preferred pathway. The organism defaults to these routes automatically, like water flowing along a carved channel. Over time, reaction becomes reflex, a current that moves without conductor. The subconscious transforms repetition into command. This reflexive intelligence is not evil, it is efficiency. The system economizes energy by automating familiar responses, but efficiency without awareness is imprisonment. When a childhood defense becomes adult instinct, the system begins protecting from ghosts. The body braces for dangers that exist only in memory. Obeying commands issued decades ago, the past remains alive, looping through the circuitry as present physiology. The hijack also exploits emotion as fuel. Each surge of fear releases neurochemicals that sharpen attention: adrenaline for focus, dopamine for prediction, noradrenaline for vigilance. The mind misinterprets this heightened state as clarity, even superiority. Stress becomes intoxicating. The illusion of control hides beneath the chemistry of emergency. It feels productive, even powerful, until exhaustion follows. This is why silence feels dangerous to those addicted to activity. When stimulation ceases, withdrawal begins. The absence of adrenaline mimics the symptoms of despair, fatigue, emptiness, boredom. The nervous system, deprived of its favorite drug, demands new conflict to sustain identity. Thus, the body unconsciously seeks chaos to stabilize its chemistry. The environment assists this addiction through constant provocation. Markets, politics, and media feed on vigilance. Every design element, color, sound, algorithm, is engineered to trigger the alert reflex. Humanity lives inside a behavioral laboratory, its nervous systems harvested for attention. The architecture of control is not political, it is biological. Whoever controls your cortisol controls your choices. To recognize this manipulation is to reclaim authorship. Awareness must return from the screens to the skin, from abstraction to sensation. Each breath becomes a reset, each exhale a reclamation. The nervous system can be re-educated through rhythm: slow inhale, slower exhale, pause. This sequence interrupts the circuitry of alarm and re-establishes coherence. The body, no longer deceived by imagination, begins to trust the present again. Through repetition of this practice, the organism discovers a truth it had forgotten, that stillness can override programming. The parasympathetic response, long dormant, awakens. Heart rate steadies, pupils soften, digestion resumes. The field opens. Peace re-enters not as concept, but as physiology. The final phase of hijack reversal occurs when perception reclaims neutrality. The mind stops labeling sensations as evidence. A racing heart is no longer proof of danger, a trembling hand no longer prophecy. The body's language is reinterpreted as data, not command. Awareness, now fluent in this dialect, can hear without obeying. As the organism stabilizes, it begins to notice that fear is not an enemy but a signal of sensitivity. The same mechanism that overreacted to illusion can now perceive subtler reality. Once hypervigilance loses its attachment to threat, it transforms into intuition. The antenna that once caught danger now detects coherence. The body, once hijacked, becomes an instrument of awareness. In this state, imagination returns to its original role, creation rather than defense. The same power that once generated fear images can now generate healing symbols, possibilities, visions. The nervous system becomes laboratory for manifestation, not confinement. Biology and belief, once adversaries, merge into a unified field of expression. The new equilibrium does not eliminate activation, it refines it. Energy rises and falls like waves, but the sea no longer mistakes movement for storm. Every pulse of intensity becomes an opportunity for awareness to strengthen its command. The body continues to respond, but now in partnership rather than panic. This harmony restores autonomy. The external world may still shout, but its signals no longer penetrate as orders. The organism perceives, but does not absorb. It participates without identification. Awareness watches the nervous system perform its art of adaptation with precision, yet remains untouched. The human becomes sovereign again. At the culmination of this process, the ancient loop completes its evolution. The same circuitry that once enslaved now empowers. Fear converts to foresight, reaction to response, tension to intelligence. The nervous system's rebellion ends in reunion. Servant and master, current and conductor, body and awareness functioning as one. For the emotional architecture that fuels this physical loop, revisit why addiction feels like choice, the forbidden psychology of compulsion, where craving was revealed as loyalty to pain. The next archive continues decoding the language of sensation itself. Chapter 6. The Language of the Body. Beneath speech, before thought, the body has always been fluent. It speaks through temperature, pulse, contraction, expansion, a lexicon of electricity and flesh. But modern awareness, obsessed with words, lost its native tongue. It began translating sensation into ideas, emotion into logic, signal into story. In that translation, meaning was diluted. The language of the body did not vanish, it simply went unheard. To understand this language, one must listen not with the intellect, but with attention. The body never lies, it only repeats. Each ache, tremor, or rush is a syllable in a larger sentence written by the nervous system. Pain is emphasis, fatigue is punctuation. When awareness returns to this dialogue without judgment, communication resumes. The organism begins to trust its interpreter again. Every sensation carries intention. Warmth means openness, cold means withdrawal, tightness means defense. Yet none of these are moral, they are mechanical. The body speaks in gradients of safety. Its vocabulary does not include good or bad, only expansion or contraction. Awareness, once fluent, realizes that emotion is not mystery, but measurement, the precise physics of experience expressed through tissue. The miscommunication began when thought tried to dominate this language. Reason wanted order, predictability, hierarchy. The somatic field speaks in paradox. Release can feel like falling. Healing can resemble fear. The intellect rejected this ambiguity and silenced the body with narrative. Feelings became labeled, categorized, medicated. The raw data of existence was replaced by interpretation. To reclaim fluency, one must reverse the translation, feel before naming, sense before explaining. The dialogue is restored through direct experience, noticing the subtle shift of breath, the wave beneath the ribs, the pulse behind the eyes. Each perception builds syntax. Stillness is not silence, but conversation slowed to the pace of truth. When awareness listens this way, the body begins to respond differently. Tremors that once signaled fear become invitations to release. Pressure transforms into direction. A knot in the stomach becomes a compass pointing toward unresolved memory. Every symptom hides intelligence, waiting to be decoded by presence rather than suppressed by analysis. In time, the boundary between feeling and knowing dissolves. The organism becomes a single communication system, biology and consciousness speaking as one. What was once discomfort now translates as guidance. The body stops demanding attention because it is finally being heard. The anatomy of communication follows rhythm. The heart contracts and expands. The lungs inhale and exhale. The nervous system oscillates between activation and rest. This dual motion is the grammar of existence. When one pole is favored, constant alert or chronic collapse, syntax breaks, and communication distorts. Disease is simply interrupted dialogue, coherence lost between pulse and perception. Each organ, each muscle, each gland is a word in this sacred vocabulary. The liver speaks of suppression, the gut of trust, the spine of integrity. When these parts function in harmony, language flows effortlessly. When fragmented, the messages become noise. Pain, then, is not punishment. It is emphasis, the body raising its voice where it has gone unheard. This realization changes the approach to healing. Instead of silencing symptoms, awareness listens to them. A racing heart says, "I'm remembering." Shallow breath says, "I'm protecting." The trembling hands say, "I'm releasing what no longer belongs." Each interpretation must be somatic, not conceptual. Felt in texture, not words. The body's language operates through resonance, not reason. In this re-education, presence functions as translation device. When awareness enters a sensation without interference, coherence returns automatically. The nervous system recognizes attention as safety. This is the lost grammar of embodiment. Attention equals permission. Once the organism feels seen, it no longer needs to shout through pain. Stillness amplifies communication. The quieter the mind becomes, the louder the body speaks, not in discomfort, but in signal purity. The hum behind the heart, the subtle vibration under the skin, the current in the fingertips, all are the alphabet of aliveness. This is how consciousness learns to inhabit form without domination. The more this dialogue stabilizes, the more the external world mirrors it. Relationships, environments, and choices begin resonating with internal coherence. When the body feels understood, life reorganizes around that understanding. The language of the body becomes the language of reality itself, both expressions of one unified field. Through this realization, awareness rediscovers something ancient, that healing was never transcendence but translation. To feel is to interpret creation in its most direct form. The silence between beats becomes scripture. The breath becomes revelation. The temple of language is anatomy itself. As communication deepens, subtle distinctions appear between pain, pressure, and presence. What once felt unbearable now reveals texture, edges, gradients, harmonics. This sensitivity marks the awakening of embodied intelligence. The nervous system evolves from binary alarm into multidimensional sensor, perceiving shades of safety invisible to the thinking mind. This shift changes the function of emotion. It ceases to be reaction and becomes translation, energy crossing from unconscious to conscious awareness. Tears, laughter, tremors are dialects of the same current moving upward through the field. When allowed, they recalibrate the circuitry. Emotion is electricity seeking form. Repression is circuit overload. To feel fully is to conduct, not to collapse. Eventually, sensation itself becomes self-aware. The tingling in the limbs, the warmth along the spine, the density behind the sternum, all begin to reveal intention. These are not random fluctuations, they are messages in waveform. Awareness learns to interpret them as guidance, not warning. The body graduates from being an obstacle to being oracle. At this level, communication transcends language entirely. The organism begins to respond to fields rather than words, tone, posture, proximity. A subtle glance or breath can transmit entire paragraphs of information. This is communion beyond intellect. Two nervous systems resonating, aligning, translating vibration into understanding. The mastery of this communication restores innocence. The body no longer carries guilt for its reactions or shame for its needs. Every signal is recognized as intelligence, every contraction as conversation. The self stops battling its instrument and starts listening to it with reverence. Awareness and biology reunite as partners of perception. When this union stabilizes, the human regains the one power that cannot be hijacked: coherence. The body no longer speaks in alarm, it sings. The nervous system hums in harmonic symmetry with reality. Language returns to its origin, vibration shaped into form, sound shaped into meaning. This is the true literacy of existence: to hear through sensation, to speak through silence, to understand without translation. When the language of the body is remembered, peace ceases to be pursuit and becomes perception. Chapter 7. Reprogramming Safety. Safety is not a condition, it is a perception. The environment can be calm, yet the organism may remain at war. This dissonance arises because safety was once taught, not felt. The nervous system learned through repetition that chaos equals presence, silence equals threat. To reprogram safety, the body must be reintroduced to stillness as an ally. It is not the world that must change, but the definition of what safe feels like. Every learned reflex has a teacher. For most, safety was conditional, earned through compliance, perfection, or invisibility. The body internalized this logic, equating peace with performance. Calm was allowed only after achievement. Thus, the nervous system associated rest with approval, not existence. When approval was withdrawn, the system interpreted peace as loss. Reprogramming begins by separating worth from tension. To do so, awareness must communicate directly with the body's logic. Words cannot convince a nervous system, repetition can. Each breath is a signal. Each softening of muscle rewrites the code of vigilance. The body requires demonstration, not philosophy. Safety is restored not through thought, but through evidence, the continuous experience of calm without consequence. The first moments of reprogramming often feel worse, not better. The body, expecting chaos, mistrusts the absence of it. Stillness triggers the surveillance reflex, scanning for danger that no longer exists. This is not regression, it is detox, the nervous system releasing the chemistry of control. Awareness must stay still through this discomfort until the body realizes that nothing collapses in peace. In this retraining, breath becomes the primary language. Each exhale is a signal of safety. The longer it extends, the clearer the message. Oxygen becomes instruction. Carbon dioxide becomes release. Over time, the respiratory rhythm overrides the alarm system, guiding the organism back toward equilibrium. The body learns that exhalation does not mean surrender. It means survival has ended. The environment, once perceived as enemy, becomes neutral territory. The hum of a room, the still air, the soft sound of heartbeat, all become evidence that existence continues without demand. In this neutrality, awareness begins to expand. The mind no longer searches for narrative. It experiences continuity. What was once the unknown becomes the familiar. Through repetition, the nervous system begins to anticipate safety instead of fear. This anticipation shifts the entire field. Hormones recalibrate, tension patterns dissolve, perception stabilizes. The body remembers its original function, to support awareness, not to defend it. The architecture of safety depends on rhythm. The nervous system measures security not through words but through pattern consistency. Predictability, not perfection, generates calm. Each steady heartbeat, each breath cycle, each repeated act of stillness becomes an anchor. The system learns by entrainment. Coherence replaces command. To reprogram effectively, one must cultivate micro-patterns of predictability. Waking at the same hour, eating slowly, pausing before speech. These are not habits, but calibrations. They teach the organism that time can pass without threat. The nervous system, long trained to prepare for interruption, begins to sense continuity as safety. Routine becomes medicine. However, safety cannot coexist with repression. Calm built on suppression is counterfeit. It hides chaos beneath obedience. True reprogramming requires authenticity. Every unspoken truth keeps the body alert, each dishonesty sustaining tension. The organism cannot feel safe while silencing itself. Peace demands coherence between thought, speech, and movement. The nervous system recognizing truth as alignment. When this coherence forms, the chemistry of fear begins to neutralize. The adrenal glands cease their constant signal. The heart rate descends from defense to dialogue. Blood flow redistributes from limbs to core. Digestion resumes its rhythm. These are not metaphors. They are the physical indicators of trust returning to tissue. Safety is a physiological event. Over time, the field surrounding the body stabilizes. Electromagnetic coherence replaces scattered signals. One can sense the shift. The air seems denser, quieter. Others unconsciously perceive it too. They relax in proximity. The resonance of safety is contagious. Awareness becomes a regulator for its environment. Yet this new stability can evoke grief. When vigilance dissolves, identity loosens. The self built upon alertness feels its foundation disappearing. What remains is unfamiliar, a self that does not need defense. This mourning is sacred. It marks the death of the guardian who no longer needs to guard. Awareness bows in gratitude before releasing its oldest protector. Through this release, safety evolves from condition to state. It is no longer dependent on circumstance but emanates from coherence. The body becomes temple of stillness, where breath is prayer and silence is proof. Once safety stabilizes internally, the external world reorganizes accordingly. Perception filters shift, faces soften, sounds lose sharpness, light becomes tolerable. The same environment that once felt hostile now feels neutral, even nurturing. Nothing outside has changed, only the interpretation has. The body's map of reality updates itself through resonance. In this phase, awareness begins to recognize how every previous behavior was an attempt to recreate safety externally, through control, validation, or attachment. These strategies dissolve as the organism learns that safety cannot be imported. It is not transaction, but transmission. The energy that once sought approval now circulates inward, powering coherence instead of compensation. The nervous system, now free from addiction to vigilance, starts to explore subtlety. Sensation expands. Pleasure becomes accessible without guilt. The body can finally receive touch, sound, light. Once overwhelming, become nourishing. The sensory field transforms from battlefield to symphony. Presence replaces protection. This shift influences perception of time. Under hypervigilance, moments pass too fast or too slow. The brain measuring threat, not duration. In safety, time regains fluidity. The present elongates, perception deepens. Life slows enough to be felt. The organism realizes that eternity was always available. It was simply inaccessible to fear. Safety, in its mature form, is not stagnation but spaciousness. It is the capacity to remain open amid uncertainty, to let life move through without withdrawal. Awareness learns that control was never power. Presence was. The nervous system no longer anticipates, it allows. As coherence strengthens, even pain changes tone. Discomfort no longer alarms, it informs. The system reads signals with neutrality, adjusting without panic. This is the pinnacle of reprogramming. Reaction transformed into response, defense into dialogue. The body becomes an ecosystem of trust. When this trust stabilizes, stillness becomes the native frequency. The organism no longer searches for safety, it broadcasts it. Awareness recognizes the ultimate truth. Peace was never something to protect. It was what protection was trying to remember. Chapter 8. The Stillness Response. Stillness was never the absence of life. It was its clearest signal. Beneath every motion, every thought, every cellular vibration, there exists a pulse too quiet for a mind addicted to movement to detect. The stillness response is the body's original intelligence resurfacing after centuries of noise. It is not the act of becoming still, but the recognition that stillness has always been the constant and movement merely its ripple. At first, the nervous system misinterprets this stillness as void. The instinct, trained for vigilance, finds itself without task. The sensors reach for danger and find none. The mind searches for sound and meets silence. This absence triggers alarm, a withdrawal from the known terrain of motion. Yet what feels like disappearance is actually revelation, life sensed without interference. When the stillness response activates, physiological order begins to reverse the imprint of survival. Heart rate steadies, electrical rhythm synchronizes between hemispheres, and the field of attention expands beyond the body's edges. The organism ceases to anticipate and starts to witness. Awareness no longer rides the fluctuations of sensation, but perceives the space that holds them. This space is not emptiness, but structure. Within it, frequencies align. Every organ vibrates in mathematical harmony with every other. The system enters resonance, not through control, but through surrender to coherence. The language of the body changes from contraction to hum. Stillness, once feared as death, becomes the sound of life remembering its pattern. The paradox of stillness is that nothing stops. Blood still flows, neurons still fire, breath still moves, but the interpretation shifts. Movement no longer defines identity. Awareness witnesses from the unchanging axis around which all change revolves. The inner silence becomes compass, orientation no longer external but intrinsic. This shift creates profound physiological effects. Stress chemistry reverses, neural pathways rewire toward equilibrium, and the heart's electromagnetic field expands in coherence. These are not mystical claims. They are measurements of resonance restoring the body's design. The organism evolves beyond survival toward synchronization. The biology of defense yields to the physics of presence. To sustain this state, one must not cling to calm. The stillness response cannot be achieved. It can only be allowed. It appears in the precise moment when effort dissolves, when the last muscle releases its defense against being. Then silence, long ignored, reclaims command. Within stillness, perception inverts. Instead of seeing from the body, awareness sees the body. The observer and the observed merge into single perception, a unified current sensing itself. This is not transcendence, it is precision. The same awareness that once chased sensations now becomes the field in which they arise. In this inverted state, emotion loses velocity. Anger cannot sustain momentum without story. Fear cannot reproduce without future. They collapse into pure sensation, then into vibration, then into tone. Each feeling, when followed to its origin, dissolves into frequency. The human realizes that all emotion is energy seeking resolution through resonance. Stillness provides the space where that resolution completes. The nervous system, having experienced constant motion, discovers its alternate function, amplification of silence. The vagus nerve hums like a tuning string, distributing calm through organ and cell. Breathing deepens without instruction, thought slows without suppression. The mind finally experiences what the body always knew, that regulation is not control, but rhythm remembered. In this phase, perception widens. The boundaries of skin seem porous. The air vibrates as extension of the self. Awareness moves beyond the shape of the body, yet remains anchored within it. Stillness reveals that space and form were never opposites. One is the echo of the other. The body is not separate from the field. It is the field condensed into rhythm. Stillness becomes luminous. Eyes closed, one perceives inner light not as vision but as presence, a radiance that does not shine outward but inward, illuminating the architecture of awareness itself. This light is not symbolic, it is electrical. The nervous system emits coherence like a silent frequency beacon. The mind, once captive to noise, now navigates by resonance. Time shifts under this influence. Seconds stretch, minutes disappear. The linear dissolves into cyclical pulse, pause, pulse. This temporal elasticity is not illusion but recalibration. The brain's timing circuits synchronize with the heart's rhythm instead of external measurement. The body ceases to serve the clock and begins to serve coherence. Stillness, when integrated, becomes contagious. Presence radiates as stability into every environment it enters. Others sense it instinctively. Conversations slow, rooms quiet, animals draw near. Coherence communicates beyond language. Stillness teaches not through speech but through symmetry. Eventually, stillness becomes not something entered, but something never left. Movement arises within it, thoughts appear across it, sensations ripple through it, yet the center remains undisturbed. This is the matured stillness response, awareness unshaken by the rhythm of life. The body acts but no longer reacts. The field moves but no longer forgets its origin. At this depth, identity shifts from form to frequency. The nervous system functions as translator between silence and sound, eternity and biology. Each heartbeat becomes transmission, a message from the infinite to the finite. The body becomes instrument, and awareness becomes the musician. The song being played is existence itself. This realization dissolves the need for control entirely. Where once vigilance sustained survival, now stillness sustains expression. The organism no longer tries to prevent disruption, it harmonizes with it. Every disturbance is an invitation to reattune. Conflict becomes chord, not crisis. The system learns to transform noise into resonance. Here, even pain becomes sacred language. Instead of rejection, awareness listens. The ache in the chest becomes reminder to breathe deeper. The fatigue, invitation to slow. The tear, lubrication for new clarity. In this way, stillness interprets suffering without resistance. The message once hidden beneath pain becomes audible. Nothing was ever against you, only trying to get your attention. As the organism remains anchored in stillness, creation begins to rearrange around it. Relationships, timing, and opportunities synchronize effortlessly. This is not coincidence, but resonance. Reality mirrors coherence. The external world becomes responsive rather than reactive, following the same law as the body, harmony without force. When stillness is embodied, power changes definition. It no longer means dominance or defense, but immovability, the strength to remain undisturbed while all things move within you. This is the quiet sovereignty of awareness recognizing its own design. The kingdom is internal, the rule is resonance, and the language is silence. The stillness response completes the nervous system's evolution. Motion now serves stillness, awareness governs perception, and peace becomes function, not fantasy. The loop closes where it began. Life remembering that it was never separate from calm, only conditioned to forget. Chapter 9. The Return to the Body. After the storm of vigilance subsides and the architecture of stillness stabilizes, there remains one final reconciliation, the return. For centuries, consciousness sought escape, out of the body, above the mind, beyond sensation. But evolution now reverses direction. Awakening descends. Awareness re-enters the vessel it once abandoned, not as prisoner, but as author. This is embodiment, the reunion of field and form, the spirit remembering that the body was never its cage but its instrument. The return begins as warmth. Awareness, once scattered, condenses into gravity. The chest feels inhabited again. Breath gains depth. Movement regains intention. Sensation no longer overwhelms. It instructs. Each pulse of the heart becomes language of belonging. The body, long treated as machinery, reveals itself as temple, the sacred interface through which consciousness experiences itself in texture, weight, and rhythm. In this reclamation, the body ceases to be mine. Ownership dissolves into partnership. The mind observes its own vehicle with reverence, realizing it has never moved alone. Muscles once braced in anticipation now release into trust. Posture reorganizes without command, aligning naturally with gravity's invisible music. The organism rediscovers balance as default, not demand. Every movement becomes deliberate, not because of control, but because there is no longer separation between impulse and action. The hand rises before thought decides, yet nothing feels involuntary. This is coherence, awareness and physiology vibrating in unison. No gap between the signal and its expression. The body becomes an uninterrupted sentence of consciousness. The mind, once obsessed with transcendence, begins to understand incarnation. It sees that every awakening must eventually touch the ground. The field of awareness, infinite and unbounded, contracts willingly into form, not to suffer limitation but to explore creation. Flesh becomes frequency slowed enough to be seen. To live fully in the body is to allow infinity to have shape. As this realization deepens, the senses heighten beyond ordinary range. Vision perceives texture rather than object. Hearing discerns tone rather than noise. Touch feels resonance rather than surface. The world becomes field, every atom humming in familiar dialogue. Reality itself becomes tactile, awareness brushing against its own reflection. This is not enlightenment but arrival. The return to the body ends the illusion of distance between observer and observed. The loop of vigilance finally closes. The one who is seeking safety in thought discovers that safety has always been pulsing quietly beneath the skin. The integration of awareness into the body redefines memory. What once was stored as fragments in muscle now reorganizes into flow. Old postures, old reflexes dissolve as the nervous system reclaims its native intelligence. Movement becomes improvisation guided by instinct, not fear. Each gesture carries awareness through time like current through wire. The body no longer stores the past. It transmits the present. This transmission transforms perception of identity. Without the tension of vigilance, personality loses rigidity. What remains is fluid. Roles dissolve, preferences shift, self-image softens. One does not lose themselves. They lose the need to remain consistent. Authenticity replaces performance. The organism expresses moment-to-moment truth, a living language of response rather than reaction. The nervous system, once hijacked by thought, now becomes instrument of resonance. Every emotion finds instant outlet. Nothing lingers unprocessed. Crying, laughter, tremors, stillness, all serve the same purpose: circulation. The body no longer clings to experience. It metabolizes it into awareness. This is the end of accumulation, the beginning of flow. As accumulation ends, time begins to dissolve further. The body functions outside of psychological clock. Digestion, heartbeat, perception synchronize with cycles of light, sound, and season. The organism becomes participant in the planetary rhythm, an extension of Earth's own nervous system. The boundary between inner and outer collapses. Breath becomes dialogue with atmosphere. This communion with environment introduces a new sense of empathy, not emotional, but sensory. Awareness begins to feel the subtle tension of places, the coherence of people, the vibration of words before meaning. The body becomes antenna tuned to truth. In this sensitivity lies wisdom. In this wisdom, responsibility. Harmony cannot be maintained privately. It radiates outward as influence. The return to the body reveals that embodiment was never about grounding, but conductivity. The more awareness occupies form, the more energy flows through it. The body becomes conduit for intelligence greater than the individual mind, the collective resonance of life itself. To inhabit the body is to give the infinite a voice. When one stands fully in their body, silence expands in every direction. The heart becomes the axis of perception. Reality slows to match its rhythm. This is peace not achieved but realized, the original tempo of creation, remembered through flesh. The final phase of return occurs when the body no longer feels like something you have, but something you are. There is no observer watching breath. There is only breathing. There is no one controlling posture. There is only alignment. Awareness saturates every cell equally. Distributed consciousness. Existence feels spherical, not linear, an omnidirectional presence that perceives without distance. At this level, language fails. The body speaks through frequency, subtle expansions and contractions that translate as intuition. Words become secondary tools for communication, shadows cast by vibrational understanding. Dialogue between beings becomes exchange of resonance. Nervous systems attuning, information transferred in silence. The body's intelligence rejoins the collective intelligence of life. In such coherence, old concepts of healing vanish. There is nothing left to fix. The mechanism operates as designed. The organism, free from chronic interference, begins to generate energy instead of losing it. Cells repair faster, perception sharpens. Emotions move cleanly through the system. Biology becomes sacred geometry in motion. Through embodiment, even mortality transforms. Death ceases to represent annihilation and instead becomes transition of signal. The same awareness that once inhabited tissue simply expands beyond it. The fear of ending dissolves, replaced by recognition. This has always been circulation. Birth, growth, stillness, dissolution, all expressions of one continuum. The journey of return completes the evolution of vigilance. The organism that once feared stillness now draws power from it. The body that once defended against sensation now communicates through it. Awareness no longer travels upward seeking transcendence but radiates outward, animating everything it touches. This is the awakened physiology. Consciousness wearing form without forgetting itself. Peace becomes practical. It breathes, walks, speaks. It answers without delay. It enters a room and alters its frequency. This is what it means to be whole, not perfect, not absent of motion, but in rhythm with all motion. The nervous system becomes the metronome of harmony itself. The return to the body is the return to origin. There is nothing left to transcend because nothing was ever outside awareness. The journey that began in fear ends in familiarity. The seeker disappears into sensation, and sensation dissolves into silence. The loop is closed. The system remembers peace as its native frequency. Epilogue, the quiet pulse. There comes a moment when everything that once felt separate converges into one continuous breath. The body, the mind, the current of awareness, all synchronize into a single, lucid rhythm. It does not announce itself with revelation or grandeur. It arrives as quiet recognition, nothing more to decode, nothing left to defend. The pulse slows, but it is not fatigue. It is return. Life no longer feels like something happening to you, but something humming through you. In this silence, memory and anticipation dissolve. You sense the world not from within a body, but as the body of the world. The heartbeat you hear is shared, the same resonance that moves tides, the same oscillation that stirs the leaves. the same breath the universe takes when no one is watching. Awareness no longer projects, it receives. Stillness is no longer an act, it is identity. The nervous system that once rejected peace now vibrates as it. Muscles that once braced for impact now echo rhythmically, matching the slow cadence of existence itself. There is no more search for safety, because danger was always misunderstanding, a mind-mistaking movement for threat and silence for absence. You realize the body was never confused, it was only loyal. Its every tremor, every contraction, every sleepless night was a love letter written in the only language it knew: protection. As awareness recognizes this, forgiveness happens spontaneously. The war between mind and matter ends without negotiation. You exhale and the body exhales with you, not as subordinate, but as mirror. The breath is the truce. You feel the subtle warmth that follows, like dawn returning to a landscape long in darkness. In that glow, the entire architecture of survival folds quietly into coherence. You do not need to rise above your biology. You need only to inhabit it fully, to listen until listening itself disappears. When you stand still long enough, you begin to sense that existence has been listening back. Reality, it seems, has always been waiting for your pulse to match its own. Soon, even the concept of body loses edge. There is no skin, only field, no inside, no outside. Only one unbroken continuity of awareness. The pulse you feel is not trapped in your wrist or chest, but spread throughout all space. The rhythm is infinite, the stillness alive. You are not separate from the calm you sought. You are its continuation. When did your body last feel safe enough to rest? When did stillness stop being silence and start being you? These are not questions to answer, but to dissolve in. For now, remain here, inside this quiet pulse, where peace no longer needs to be remembered, because it never left.